Thank you for joining me for another Quick Hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. With me today, I have Brandon Mahoney. He is the co-founder of LaunchPoint Labs and an expert in the sales side of startups. He is currently based in Oregon. I have Emily Rentas. She's a transformational coach and mental health practitioner specializing in merger and acquisitions. She's in New York. I have Jim Lee. He's a financial futurist with 30 years experience at StratFi. He's also the author of book Foresight Investing, a complete guide to finding your next great trade. And finally, I have Valerie Nielsen. She is the co-founder of Longview Leader Corporation. She's a risk executive with entrepreneurial mindset, looking to turn that no into a yes. The question that I have for you today, how do you decide if something is worth arguing about? Valerie, I'm going to ask you to go first.
I think, to me, I always think about how important is it to be right? It's not that you should argue about something that's wrong, but sometimes that subject matter expert in you wants to just be right. And sometimes that's not the long-term strategy. So that's how I think about it. Is it worth arguing? And let alone, am I better in a more longer term to influence and bring someone around?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to think about what would be the gain out of arguing and the approach, the outcome of this. Sometimes arguing could be for something that is bigger than you and you feel like something needs to be said, but at some point you need to understand that also peace at the end of it is sometimes more worth it because it starts becoming a power struggle. Is this really about winning and being right versus wrong than really just trying to find a solution, right? So really keeping your emotions in check and understanding why is it that you want to fight for this so badly? What do you want to get out of this? Is there a better way of going about it? And if you do win, and what does it mean? So it also plays into ego. Like, is this really worth me arguing over this, over my peace?
Mm-hmm.
I think it comes down to what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve with this argument? And also, what's the relationship with the individual you're having that argument with? Is this somebody who you're possibly coaching and mentoring, maybe a child? And then what is the point of arguing with the child? Or is this someone who you're a partner with and you're not arguing to be right or wrong, but more so arguing because you're trying to find the best possible answer?
Yeah, I'm not even sure if you can win an argument. Because even if you win an argument, someone's feelings are going to be hurt. You don't always manage to persuade the person that you're attempting to persuade. And when I think about this, I think it's okay to be invested in the outcome, whether you get the right things happening or not. But it's harder if you're invested in being right or in being the winner. And that's where things get messy.
Yeah, I think for me, part of it is if harm is going to come to me by not standing up for myself, like if it's a boundary for me, then that's an argument I'm going to have. I'm going to say, this is my boundary and this is not something I'm going to allow you to cross. But if no harm is going to come to me, then sometimes I'm like, to your point, Emily, do I need to be right? Is this a hill that I need to die on? Does it really matter? So I think the question you have to ask next is when you find yourself in an argument that you realize, wait a minute, this is not so worth it. Why did I get into this? How do you back out of it? Like, how do you unwind that?
Well, I'm just thinking an argument that it doesn't mean that voices are raised and that there's a lot of emotional investment. I think that's another thing to think about. Because an argument could be just that you're going back and forth and, Robyn, as you just said, hey, this is as far as I go type of thing. This is my boundary. That's a good exchange versus an argument. We tend to think about that it could be voices raised, and that usually means you're not being heard or you feel you're not being heard. So then that's the other thing about the argument is really you need to ask the 5 whys or ask a few more questions to understand the other person's position. And most likely there's something more in common than letting the emotion or just your perspective prevail.
I think it's a good opportunity to also summarize and kind of stop and say, listen, I just want to check it. Like from what you've been saying and what I'm understanding, because I think we're misunderstanding and I think we got caught up emotionally and where we are. So let's just, full stop. Let's kind of check in with each other. I think it's a good opportunity to regroup. I know that sometimes it takes people, it's like a blow to their ego to kind of, it's not that you're admitting defeat, but you're also trying to be the bigger person to acknowledge that things are not going well, right? It doesn't mean that, you're losing because you're trying to apologize or take a couple of steps back. If anything, I think it shows a big part of somebody's character when they do that, because they're not worried about how is that perceived, because they know it's the right thing to backpedal a bit because they realize they got caught up.
Yeah, if you're so far down the road that you find yourself having an argument, going beyond just having a conversation, but having an argument, there's almost always an issue behind the issue. And that it's not just what you think you're arguing about, but there's something else that's probably been unstated.
So for me, calling that emotional timeout is one of the hardest things you'll do. And sometimes it doesn't look like a calm, collected, you know what? I think we should take a pause. As much as I'd love it to look like that, it doesn't always. Sometimes it's like, I love you. I cannot have this conversation with you right now. I'm going to go take a walk. I'll be back.
Yeah.
To your point, Emily, that doesn't mean, oh, I lost. It just means I know myself well enough. But catching that, I think, is really hard for most people.
Well, that's self-awareness on so many things. Are you able to kind of step out a little bit and self-monitor? And that's not something a lot of people get to.
Yeah, that psychosomatic response, that ability to recognize my blood pressure is going up, my logical brain may not be as engaged as I wish it was. And that for me is the time where I'm like, this might not be worth arguing about, when I notice that. But it's taken me a long time to learn to recognize it.
It's interesting because from the opposite perspective, I've been in relationships where the individuals have done that and they've said, okay, I can't have this conversation right now, walk away. And it was hard for me to realize that that didn't mean I was right. That didn't mean I won the argument. And just from thinking about it from that perspective, it's interesting to hear it now.
Well, and I'm wondering, so what would have worked better for you to take a pause in an argument at that point?
I don't think anything would have worked better. I think it was just my lack of maturity at that time.
That's a good point.
At that point, it was very much if I'm in a conversation or argument with somebody, I'm going to be right. I'm going to make sure I'm right. And as soon as somebody says, okay, I can't have this conversation, to me, it's like, okay, they're going to try to find more evidence. But right now I won. In reality, that was just immaturity.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know, so Russ has this thing he says sometimes where he'll say to me, Robyn, we have been around this circle before. I know where you stand. You know where I stand. Arguing about this is not going to get us anywhere. And the younger me would have kept going, like, no, we're having this fight again. We're going to go around this circle again. And now with more maturity and more self-awareness, I'm like, okay, he's right. This is silly. Let's walk away. And that can be tough.
Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes it's just that yelling. You can feel that's release and feel that they've done something, but there's always still damage when you're yelling at someone, right? There's that emotional damage, just like from a fire, right? There's burn marks and people remember. And then that's why some of that cycle keeps happening over and over again, because people don't get satisfied somehow because they want to resolve those burns. And so I think that's what you have to think about too with an argument.
Well, it's a knee-jerk reaction. That's why mindfulness and meditation is so important for us, because you're literally training your body and your mind to catch yourself. Let me think about how my body feels in the moment, how I'm breathing. The more you practice that when you're not in crisis, you're going to be more apt to catch yourself in those knee-jerk reactions. The more that you can be familiar in how you can bring yourself back, that's the essence of what mindfulness and meditation is.
I think that we've all matured and have enough self-awareness to know that we have been there, done that in terms of reacting kind of like inappropriately. And I was watching a comedy special on Netflix, and there's a comedian saying that, when you date guys, you always want a cookie, but you start with the cookie dough first, right? And it needs to bake in the oven a little bit before you ultimately get what you want. And I'm just happy that I found a wife who was willing to let me bake for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm really fortunate that Russ and I never escalate to yelling. Like, we don't ever let it get to that point. And I think that that's something, there is no argument that I would have with the man who I love and who loves me that is worth me yelling at him for. That's a line for us. And maybe that's something other people can decide, is it worth the damage that you're going to do to someone you love to be right.
Seldom,
back to your
point.
Right?
Yeah, seldom if ever.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about, is it worth arguing about? And I don't think that we as humans spend enough time on that particular topic. We get so wrapped up emotionally that we end up fighting about things. And when we look back at it, we're like, I don't know if that was worth the argument and the damage it created. So to your point, Emily, if we can learn to catch it sooner, That would be awesome. That is our 10 minutes. So I'm going to cut us off there. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It's been wonderful. And I look forward to speaking to each of you again really soon.